Many people talk about the need for trust in buyer-supplier relationships. What they say is that partnering relationships must have trust as one of the essential ingredients. And what we observe in a relationship continuum, this is the relationship spectrum that we talk about elsewhere in our YouTube clips, that there's a range from the competitive relationships where there's an absence of trust through to collaborative relationships where trust is an essential ingredient. But this isn't a fully accurate picture. The leading researcher in the area of trust in buyer-supplier relationships is Dr. Mary Sacco from the University of Oxford. And she's undertaken her studies in the electronics industry, both in Japan and initially in the UK. And she published her book, Prices, Quality and Trust, in 1996. And since that point, she extended her research to look at countries such as Germany, the US, and also the Latin countries of Europe. And what she observed is that there is more than one form of trust. And this relates to the Japanese construction of the word trust. What she observed was that in countries like Japan and arguably Germany, trust is a lot higher. But in countries which she referred to as Anglo-Saxon, typically US and UK, she observed that trust was a lot lower in buyer-supplier relationships. And it turns out that there's these three forms of trust which impact upon the way in which buyers and suppliers treat each other, the way that they interact, and the performance within those relationships. So if you go back to that relationship spectrum and you look at the most competitive end, she referred to this as the ACR, adversarial contractual relations. And she said there is an absence of trust because nobody trusts each other. There is complete and total reliance on the contract. But as you move along the relationship spectrum towards the collaborative end, the first type of trust to be exhibited is contractual trust. Now, contractual trust is whether you believe the other party will undertake their promises in the contract. If you don't believe that, then you have to rely on the contract. But if you do believe it, you are less reliant on the contract. You don't need to refer to it as much. The second level of trust she referred to as competence trust. Now, in procurement, we select our suppliers through careful due diligence and pre-qualification. But her question was, do you believe the supplier or the other party is competent at what they're doing? Is the advice that they're giving good? Is the information that they provide accurate? If you believe that, then it exhibits the second level of trust. But the third level of trust, the highest form of trust, she observed at the extreme collaborative end of the relationship spectrum, which she called the OCR. That's the obligational contractual relations, where particularly if you look at Japanese culture, parties feel that they're in obligation to one another. And obligational trust, goodwill trust, is about whether or not you believe the other party will be fair to you. Now, this fairness principle is exhibited in things like, will they put things right? If something was to occur during the contract, will the other party remedy their own mistakes without asking? Do they self-regulate? Will they go the extra mile? Will they provide added value without being asked? And if they do, that is an example of goodwill trust. So you have this increasing hierarchy as you work along the relationship spectrum towards the collaborative end. Now, Sacco's work went on then to say, so what? What is the outcome of having high trust with suppliers in a supply chain? And she observed four things. Firstly, she observed that high trust suppliers control costs better in a contract. She also observed that high trust suppliers are able to defend their own profit margins, and so there is something in it for them. They are able to be more successful. And then interestingly, she said in high trust supplier relationships that just-in-time delivery was far more effective. And interestingly, that joint continuous improvement between buyer and supplier worked far more effectively when those relationships were in a situation of embedded trust. And so there you have it. Trust works its way along the relationship spectrum in increasing measures, and there are these three forms of trust in a hierarchy: contractual trust, competence trust, and goodwill trust.